My name is Mark, a 32-year-old graphic designer who has lived in Los Angeles his entire life. I've always prided myself on staying calm under pressure, but on January 10th, 2025, I put that trait to the test in ways I never expected. I never thought I would end up in an evacuation center, but that day, the flames came too close to ignore. The sky turned an eerie orange hue, and ash fell down like snowflakes. For the first time, the constant warnings of fire and evacuation became personal. It all started as a normal working day. I was in the office finalizing a project when emergency notifications appeared on everyone's phones. The message said that zones C, D, and E were subject to mandatory evacuation. My heart sank when I realized that my neighborhood was in Zone C. I gathered my things in a daze, barely noticing the nervous energy swirling around me as people tried to figure out their next steps. On my way out, I met Lisa, one of my colleagues. She had joined the company a few months ago and had mostly kept to herself, although she always seemed friendly enough. She told me that she lived in Area D and had nowhere to go. Her roommate had left earlier without her, and her family was out of state. Feeling a mixture of responsibility and pity, I offered her to stay with me. It seemed like the right thing to do at the time. The freeway was a nightmare. Cars were crawling, people were fleeing the city, and the thick smoke in the air made it difficult to see more than a few hundred feet ahead. Lisa sat in silence most of the way, which was fine with me. I was too focused on navigating the chaos to make small talk. We arrived at my house late at night. The air quality was terrible, and the smell of smoke was impossible to ignore, even if all the windows were tightly closed. I showed Lisa the guest room and the main areas of the house. She thanked me and quickly settled in. Her calm demeanor stood out against the tense situation. I chalked it up to her coping with the situation in her own way. That evening, I tried to focus on practical tasks, packing a bag in case we had to leave, filling the bathroom with water in case the water supply was cut off, and keeping my phone charged. Lisa mostly lived in the guest room, and I appreciated the space. But something was wrong with her. While I was running around preparing for the worst, she was sitting in the living room scrolling through her phone as if it were a normal Friday night. The night brought little peace. The wind howled outside, carrying the faint smell of burning wood. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the flames creeping closer, consuming everything in its path. At some point, I must have dozed off, because I woke up to the sound of the door creaking. My heart jumped into my throat as I sat up, listening intently. The footsteps in the hallway were too quiet to be sure if they were real, or if it was just my imagination. I told myself it was probably Lisa going to the bathroom, but the uneasy feeling in my gut refused to go away. The next morning, I saw her at the kitchen table, sitting and sipping coffee as if she owned the place. She greeted me with a bright smile that did not reach her eyes. Her calmness seemed almost unnatural given the circumstances. As I poured myself a cup of coffee, I couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that I had made a mistake by inviting her into my home. I spent the morning trying to focus on practicalities, checking the latest evacuation updates, ensuring my go bag was fully packed, and mentally preparing for the possibility that we might need to leave again. Lisa, on the other hand, seemed to be making herself more comfortable by the minute. Her belongings, which she'd carried in a single duffel bag, had somehow spread across the guest room, the living room, and even a corner of the kitchen. It was subtle, but it made the house feel less like mine. Around midday, the news turned grim. The fires were advancing faster than expected, and officials were warning that even areas outside the initial evacuation zones might be at risk. My stomach twisted as I imagined flames consuming the neighborhood. I'd always thought of my house as a sanctuary, but now it felt like a flimsy shield against an unstoppable force. Lisa joined me in the living room, settling on the couch with a casualness that felt out of place. She asked if there was anything she could do to help, but her tone didn't match the words. It was more like she was trying to sound concerned than actually offering assistance. I told her everything was under control, though the truth was far from it. Her presence was starting to wear on me. She spent a lot of time on her phone, texting or scrolling, occasionally laughing at something only she could see. It felt odd, given the gravity of the situation. The tension in the air wasn't just from the fires anymore. It was in the way she occupied space, the way she observed me when she thought I wasn't looking. That afternoon, I decided to take a short walk around the block to clear my head. The streets were eerily quiet, the usual sounds of traffic and neighbors replaced by the distant roar of helicopters and the occasional siren. Ash coated everything, turning the world a muted gray. When I returned, I found Lisa standing by my desk, rifling through a stack of mail. "Looking for something?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. She didn't flinch, but there was a flicker of something in her expression before she smiled. "Oh, sorry. I was just curious. I didn't mean to snoop." I forced a smile, but unease coiled in my chest. "No worries. Just let me know if you need something next time." The rest of the day passed in a haze of anxiety and small tasks. By the time night fell, I was exhausted, but too wound up to sleep. Lisa retreated to the guest room early, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I tried watching TV, but the endless coverage of the fires only made me more anxious. Eventually, I gave up and went to bed, though I doubted I'd get much rest. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of movement. It wasn't the soft creak of footsteps I'd heard the night before. This was more deliberate, heavier. My heart pounded as I strained to listen, every muscle in my body tense. The sound was coming from the kitchen. I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could and grabbed the flashlight I'd left by the nightstand. The house was dark except for the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the blinds. I crept down the hall, my breath shallow, the flashlight's beam cutting through the shadows. When I reached the kitchen, I found Lisa standing by the pantry, her back to me. She didn't turn around right away, as if she hadn't heard me approach. Her shoulders were hunched, and she seemed to be rummaging through the shelves. "Lisa," I said, my voice low but firm. She froze for a moment before turning to face me. Her expression was hard to read, a mix of surprise and something else I couldn't quite place. "Sorry," she said, her voice light and casual. "I couldn't sleep and thought I'd grab a snack. Hope you don't mind." Nodded slowly, though my instincts screamed that something was wrong. "It's fine. Just let me know if you need anything next time." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course. Sorry to wake you." I watched her return to the guest room, her steps measured and deliberate. When the door clicked shut behind her, I stood in the kitchen for a long time, trying to shake the unease that clung to me like smoke. Something about Lisa didn't add up, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had invited her into my home, but now I was starting to wonder if I'd let in more than I bargained for. The next day brought no relief, only a deepening sense of dread. The fires continued to spread, and the air outside was thick with smoke, making it impossible to go for another walk to clear my head. I stayed glued to my phone, refreshing the news every few minutes, searching for updates that might hint at when the danger would pass. Lisa's presence had gone from a minor irritation to an oppressive weight. She moved around the house as if she owned it, casually flipping through my magazines, rearranging items on the coffee table, and even helping herself to snacks without asking. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to confront her about the growing unease I felt. I found her in the living room, stretched out on the couch with her phone. Her duffel bag was partially unzipped on the floor, its contents spilling out in a haphazard mess. I couldn't help but notice how much her belongings had spread throughout my house in such a short time. "Hey, Lisa," I started, keeping my tone as neutral as I could. Can we talk for a second? She looked up, her expression unreadable. Sure, what's up? I've noticed a few things, I said carefully. I know this situation is stressful for both of us, but it feels like you've been making yourself a little too comfortable. This is my home, and I need it to feel like my space. For a moment, she just stared at me, her face impassive. Then she smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of her lips that sent a chill down my spine. I'm sorry if I've overstepped, she said, her tone sweet but with an edge I couldn't quite place. I'll try to be more mindful. I nodded, though her response did little to reassure me. As I turned to leave the room, I caught a glimpse of something sticking out of her bag, a stack of folded papers. I couldn't make out the details, but one of them had my name on it. My pulse quickened. Why would she have anything with my name on it? The rest of the day passed in a fog of suspicion. I couldn't stop thinking about the papers in her bag. What were they? Where had she gotten them? I told myself I was overreacting, that it was probably nothing, but the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. By the time evening rolled around, I had resolved to find out. Lisa retreated to the guest room early again, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I waited until the house was silent, the only sound the faint rustle of leaves in the smoky breeze outside. Then I crept into the living room where her bag was still sitting on the floor. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the zipper. This was a breach of trust, I knew that. But the unease gnawing at me had grown unbearable. Taking a deep breath, I unzipped the bag just enough to peek inside. The stack of papers was right on top. I pulled them out, my hands trembling. The first page was a printed email chain between me and my boss. It was a routine exchange about a project, nothing sensitive, but seeing it in her possession sent a wave of cold panic through me. The next few pages were similar. Copies of emails, notes from meetings, and even a few personal documents I hadn't realized were missing from my desk. My heart raced as I flipped through the papers. How had she gotten these? Why did she have them? I shoved the stack back into her bag and zipped it up, my mind spinning. This wasn't just overstepping boundaries. This was something else entirely. I barely slept that night, my thoughts consumed by the implications of what I'd found. The next morning, I confronted Lisa as soon as she emerged from the guest room. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. She raised an eyebrow, her expression calm but guarded. "About what?" "I saw the papers in your bag," I said, cutting straight to the point. "Why do you have those?" Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she recovered. "Oh, those? I found them in the recycling bin at work. I thought they might be useful for reference." Her explanation didn't add up, and I could feel the tension between us thickening. "That doesn't explain why you'd take personal documents or why my name is on some of them. What are you really doing here, Lisa?" For the first time, her calm demeanor cracked. Her eyes narrowed, and her smile disappeared. "You're making a big deal out of nothing," she said, her voice cold. "Maybe you should focus on the fire outside instead of creating drama in here." The shift in her tone sent a chill down my spine. I realized I didn't know Lisa at all, and now I was trapped in my own home with her. The fires outside felt like a distant threat compared to the storm brewing inside. After our confrontation, the atmosphere in the house turned suffocating. Lisa's attitude shifted. Gone was the overly casual demeanor she had displayed before. She moved through the space with a quiet intensity that set me on edge. Every interaction felt charged, as though we were both waiting for the other to make the next move. I'd thought I could tolerate her presence for a few more days, but now I wasn't so sure. Outside, the fire's advance grew more threatening. Officials extended the evacuation zone once again, and my neighborhood was now on the edge of the danger area. I debated whether to pack up and leave, but part of me hesitated. Where would I go? And what would I do about Lisa? The thought of being confined in a car with her for hours made my skin crawl. The breaking point came late that evening. I was in the kitchen, sorting through the cupboards to consolidate supplies, when I heard Lisa on the phone. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but the tension in her tone caught my attention. She was speaking rapidly, and though I couldn't make out every word, the snippets I caught were enough to chill me. Still here. I'll take care of it. Just need more time. I froze, a can of soup clutched in my hand. Take care of it? What did that mean? Who was she talking to? I strained to hear more, but her voice dropped even lower, making it impossible to catch anything else. When I heard her footsteps approaching, I quickly resumed organizing the shelves, my mind racing. Lisa walked into the kitchen with a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes. She lingered for a moment before leaving again, as if nothing unusual had happened. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Something was very wrong, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. That night I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the past few days. Lisa's strange behavior, the papers in her bag, the phone call. It all added up to a picture I couldn't make sense of. My gut told me I wasn't safe, but I didn't know what to do. Calling the police felt extreme. After all, what evidence did I have? That she'd gone through my things, that she'd made a vague phone call. It wasn't enough. Just after midnight, I heard movement again. This time it was coming from the living room. My heart pounded as I slipped out of bed and grabbed the flashlight I'd left on the nightstand. The house was silent except for the faint creak of floorboards beneath Lisa's feet. I crept down the hall, keeping the beam of the flashlight low to avoid giving myself away. When I reached the living room, I saw her standing by the front door, holding her duffel bag. She was trying to open the door as quietly as possible. My breath caught as I realized what was happening. Was she leaving? Or worse, letting someone in? I called her name, my voice cutting through the silence. She spun around, her expression a mix of surprise and irritation. She claimed she thought she heard something outside and wanted to check. Her explanation didn't make sense. Why would she need her bag to check outside? Her tone turned sharp when I questioned her further. She insisted I was imagining things, that the stress of the fires was getting to me. But her posture had shifted, her stance more threatening than defensive. I told her to leave, my voice firm despite the fear roiling in my chest. Lisa didn't argue. She slung the bag over her shoulder, opened the door, and stepped out into the smoky night. Before leaving, she turned back with an unreadable expression, muttering that I'd regret this. Then she disappeared into the darkness. I locked the door behind her, my hands trembling. Relief and fear warred within me as I stood there, staring at the empty living room. The house was mine again, but the sense of safety I'd once felt was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, too consumed by the thought that Lisa might come back, and by the nagging question of what she'd truly been after. The morning after Lisa's departure, I was still reeling from everything that had happened. The air outside was thick with smoke, and the news painted an increasingly grim picture of the fires creeping closer. Despite the chaos around me, my thoughts kept circling back to Lisa. What had she been planning? And why had she chosen to stay with me in the first place? I decided to clean the guest room, hoping the mundane task would distract me. As I stripped the bed and picked up the scattered remnants of her stay, I found something she had left behind. A small notebook wedged between the mattress and the wall. My pulse quickened as I pulled it free, the cover scuffed and unmarked. Whatever was inside might finally give me answers. Sitting at the kitchen table, I opened the notebook with trembling hands. The first few pages were filled with hurried, almost frantic handwriting. At first, it looked like a journal, but as I read further, the entries became more unsettling. There were lists of names, dates and locations, including my own name and address, notes about my habits, the layout of my house, even mentions of things I'd said during casual conversations at work. It was as though she'd been studying me. One entry, dated just a few days before the evacuation, stood out. Mark seems like a safe option. Keeps to himself, predictable. House has multiple exits. Could work if things go wrong. A chill ran down my spine. Safe option for what? What did she mean by, could work if things go wrong? The more I read, the clearer it became that Lisa had been planning something that involved me, though the specifics were maddeningly unclear. As I flipped through the notebook, I found sketches of what looked like escape routes, maps of my neighborhood, and cryptic phrases like contingency and Plan B. One page had a rough drawing of my house with annotations about sightlines and blind spots. It felt like something out of a crime thriller, not real life. My stomach churned as the implications sank in. I called the police, unsure of what else to do. When the officer arrived, I handed over the notebook and explained what had happened. He listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions. "We'll look into this," he said, his tone professional but non-committal. "For now, keep your doors locked and stay vigilant. If you see or hear from her again, call us immediately." After he left, the house felt emptier than ever. I double-checked the locks on every door and window, but it did little to calm my nerves. The notebook had confirmed my worst fears. Lisa hadn't been a harmless coworker in need of shelter. She'd been watching me, planning something I might never fully understand. The fires continued to loom in the background, but my focus was consumed by Lisa's betrayal. Every sound outside made me jump. Every shadow seemed sinister. I couldn't shake the feeling that she might return, that she'd left unfinished business. Nights became the hardest. The silence of the house was oppressive, and sleep came only in fitful bursts. Days turned into weeks, and though the fires were eventually contained, the scars they left behind were visible everywhere. Charred hillsides, destroyed homes, and the lingering smell of smoke in the air. My own scars weren't as visible, but they were just as real. I changed my locks, installed security cameras, and started looking over my shoulder in ways I never had before. I never saw Lisa again, but she left an indelible mark on my life. Trust, once so easily given, now felt like a liability. I found myself questioning people's motives, wondering what they might be hiding behind friendly smiles. The experience had shaken me to my core, a reminder that danger doesn't always come in the form of flames or natural disasters. Sometimes it walks into your life wearing the mask of a friend. Months later, I'd almost convinced myself to move on when I received an envelope in the mail. It had no return address, just my name written in neat, precise handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message that sent a fresh wave of dread crashing over me. "You'll regret this." The letter rattled me more than I cared to admit. Months had passed since Lisa had left, but her shadow lingered. The message felt like a cruel reminder that she hadn't forgotten, and possibly that she wasn't done. I stared at the paper, my hands trembling, trying to make sense of what it meant. Was this a warning? A promise? Or just another way to unsettle me? I took the letter to the police, hoping it would lead to some sort of resolution. The officer at the desk listened patiently, though I could tell he wasn't optimistic. "We'll keep this on file," he said. "But without a clear threat or a known address for Lisa, there's not much we can do right now. Keep an eye out for anything unusual, and let us know if you receive any more contact." It was a frustratingly familiar response, but I didn't press the issue. I knew they had limited resources, especially with the aftermath of the fires still affecting so many. I left the station feeling no safer than when I'd arrived. In the weeks that followed, I became hyper-vigilant. I installed more security cameras around my property and began carrying a personal alarm wherever I went. Every unfamiliar car parked on my street made my heart race. Every unexpected knock at the door set me on edge. I hated what my life had become, a constant cycle of fear and suspicion, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Lisa was still out there, watching. One night, as I was reviewing the footage from my security cameras, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was faint, barely visible at first, but unmistakable. A figure standing at the edge of my driveway, just outside the range of the motion-activated lights. They lingered for a few moments before disappearing into the shadows. I rewound the footage and watched it again and again, each time feeling a deeper pit of dread in my stomach. Was it Lisa? I couldn't be sure. The figure was too far away to make out any details, but the timing felt too coincidental to ignore. I called the police again, showing them the footage. They sent an officer to patrol the area that night, but nothing came of it. Whoever had been there was gone, leaving no trace. "It could be anyone," the officer said, trying to reassure me. "But we'll keep an eye on the area. Let us know if you see anything else." The next few days passed in a blur of anxiety. I barely slept, jumping at every creak and groan the house made. My friends tried to comfort me, suggesting that maybe I was overthinking things, that the figure might have been a random passerby. But deep down, I knew better. The notebook, the letter, the figure, it all felt too deliberate to be a coincidence. Then, one evening, as I was locking up the house for the night, I heard a noise outside. It was faint, like the crunch of gravel underfoot, but it was enough to set my nerves on edge. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously stepped onto the porch, the beam cutting through the darkness. My breath caught as I saw a shape dart behind the fence at the edge of the yard. "Who's there?" I called, my voice shaking. There was no response, only the rustling of leaves in the wind. I stood frozen, every muscle in my body tense, straining to hear any further movement. After what felt like an eternity, I slowly backed into the house and locked the door, my hands trembling. The police arrived within minutes of my frantic call. They searched the yard and the surrounding area but found no one. "Could have been an animal," one of the officers suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. They assured me they'd increase patrols in the neighborhood, but their words did little to ease my fear. In the days that followed, I decided I couldn't stay in the house any longer. It no longer felt like home. It felt like a trap, a place where I was constantly waiting for something terrible to happen. I put the house on the market and moved to a different part of the city, hoping a fresh start would help me find some semblance of peace. Even now, months later, I still look over my shoulder more often than I'd like to admit. Lisa may be gone from my life, but the scars she left behind remain. I've learned to be more cautious, to trust my instincts, and to protect myself in ways I never thought I'd need to. But a part of me knows I'll never fully let my guard down again. Not after her. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that letter and the promise it carried. "You'll regret this." I don't know if Lisa meant it as a threat or a taunt, but either way, she succeeded. I regret letting her into my home, into my life, and I regret not recognizing the danger sooner. But most of all, I regret that she still holds this power over me, even from a distance. Lisa may be gone, but her presence lingers, like a ghost that refuses to be exorcised. And as much as I try to move on, a part of me knows she'll always be out there, somewhere, waiting, watching. If you like this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click on the bell to listen to new stories from Mr. Fear every day. Thank you for watching.